Another working morning began in the main office building of the Financial Weekly. As it usually happens in such places in the morning, there was also morning turmoil. There was noise and clamor everywhere. The office was coming back to life after the night's silence, welcoming the employees to their workstations. Emily received a phone call from someone. An unknown number? The girl, after a little thought, picked up the phone. "Hello, is this Emily Manson from Financial Weekly?" Someone's unfamiliar voice asked. And Emily, saying hello, replied that it was her. "I'm Adam Maurice, assistant to the president of Mingu Bank." The stranger introduced himself in turn. The man reminded Emily that their magazine had arranged an interview with Mr. Mark Reagan a month ago, and added that due to personal circumstances, the interview would have to be rescheduled for a week. Emily seemed shocked by this news. Yes, she was literally rebelling in her heart. She wanted to scream. What the hell? After all, interviews always require promptness. Emily realized that in a week, it would be too late. "I'm sorry, but we can't reschedule it. Could you ask the director if there's any way he can squeeze us into his schedule?" the girl asked in a calm voice. "You can even today! Even a phone call will do!" She coaxed the assistant to agree to at least a couple hours. After a brief pause, the aide replied that Mr. Reagan had a rather important dinner tonight. "But I suppose I could arrange a meeting," he immediately added. There was a glint of hope in Emily's eyes. However, Mr. Adam immediately emphasized that he could not guarantee that Mr. Director would have time for them. Emily was already glad for that answer as well. She asked the assistant for the address, saying that she would wait for them there. That was the end of their phone conversation, and Emily hung up the phone and collapsed on the table with a sigh of relief. Who on earth was this Mark Reagan? At the age of 27, he had taken over the family business, Mingu Bank, when it was in danger of extinction. It is also that despite public disapproval, he rose to fame and became the center of attention of the entire financial world. The name Mark Reagan is so appealing that it would directly affect the popularity of a journalist who would interview him. Of course, everyone was well aware of this, and Emily was no exception. "What is it? Didn't you plan to celebrate your boyfriend's birthday?" a colleague sitting at a neighboring table asked in surprise. "It can't be helped. It's not like I could miss Mark Reagan," Emily replied. Just at that moment, the phone in her hand rang. Oh, it was Alex. Just when they mentioned his name, he called right away. What a thing! Emily picked up the phone. Alex asked if his sweetheart was done with work and offered to pick her up. Ah, how embarrassing. Emily confessed in a guilty voice that she had a very important interview scheduled and hinted that she was unlikely to make it today. "Ah, don't worry, it's your job after all." Emily's boyfriend responded understandingly and added that he would meet his friend in that case. "I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well today and won't be able to go to the movies with you tonight," the girl immediately added. Yes. While still talking to the assistant director, she felt a pain in her lower abdomen and realized that her period was starting. But even here, Alex was understanding. He calmed Emily down, saying that it was just a birthday, and they could always celebrate it next year. "I'll pick you up later, but for now I'll get back to work," he said lastly. That was the end of the conversation, leaving a residue and guilt on Emily's soul. Life is hard," Camille sighed beside her. "But to be honest, your boyfriend is too understanding," Camille pointed out, surprised to emphasize that after all, Alex and Emily had only recently gotten back together. "If I dumped my boyfriend during the candy bouquet period, regardless of the reason, he'd be mad at me," she added, sipping her tea. Her coworker's words, though slightly annoying, still made Emily think. Alex is understanding. I guess so, Emily thought. However, there was a feeling of uneasiness in her heart. After all, Alex didn't even ask what was wrong with her well-being and passed out in a hurry. And then Emily caught herself that she was worrying too much. The girl patted herself on the cheeks, thinking that she had just screwed herself up for nothing. Ah, it must be her period. Emily thought that was the reason why she had become too sensitive. She decided to herself that she just needed to think less. Amelie decided to switch gears. After all, since she had chosen the job, she had to prepare well for the upcoming interview. Time flew by very quickly. Soon Amelie was racing through the city in search of Mark Reagan. She reached Warner Manor when it was already dark outside. The weather didn't bode well either. Clouds thickened over the town and seemed to portend the imminent onset of a thunderstorm. Amelie sat down at the table and opened her laptop and started preparing for the interview. Time went on, but Amelie still sat alone. She suddenly noticed the clock and mentally noted that she had been waiting for over 2 hours. God, please let this interview be a success, she called out in her thoughts. The pain in her stomach was increasingly reminding of itself. Amelie periodically shuddered involuntarily. If she had known it would take so long, she would have taken an anesthetic. At last, the sound of approaching footsteps sounded in the distance, but Amelie didn't hear them. It was Roy Cooper, a.k.a. the second man in the Ming group, and with that, Mark Reagan's son-in-law. He was just about to enter, but suddenly stopped. For just at that moment, Amelie's cell phone rang. The girl quickly picked up the phone. "Hello, Deputy Adam," she exclaimed with hope in her voice. But the voice on the phone immediately rushed to dash all of Amelie's hopes. "Miss Manson, I apologize. The reception is almost over, but Mr. Reagan has other pressing business to attend to," he informed her. Amelie realized that today's interview was not destined to happen. The girl went outside without any mood at all. Her stomach ached on top of everything else. Amelie had fewer and fewer reasons to be in a good mood. Noticing the active movement of people in the main hall, noise and noise, the girl decided to enter too. Looking around puzzled, Amelie noted that there were a lot of acquaintances she had interviewed. I guess I can try my luck again, she thought. If the reception wasn't over yet, Amelie might still have a chance to realize what she had planned. Oh, one of the guests seemed to notice Amelie. He recognized the girl reporter and called out loudly to her. The man asked if Amelie was alone and offered the girl a ride. Yes, Amelie recognized Mr. Lickwell as well. "Ha, Mr. Lickwell. What a coincidence." She smiled awkwardly. "Come on, it's going to be hard to find a cab in this heavy rain." The man began coaxing more insistently while taking Amelie by the shoulder. The girl, refusing, sharply pulled back her arm and emphasized that her boyfriend would be here soon. Roy Cooper was just watching this scene from his car. He started talking to someone, and as he continued to look in the reporter's direction, he remarked that Amelie Manson had once interviewed him and that she was a good person. "I heard Adam say she's been waiting for you all night, poor thing," he added. If it isn't Mark Reagan himself. "Give her a ride, Roy," the president asked. He glanced at the girl and stared at her. Even from a distance, it was obvious that she was very beautiful. Long black hair, freely lying on her shoulders in unruly curls. Sad, but no less beautiful look, which Amelie for some reason lowered to the floor. Beautiful, Mark thought to himself, but he turned away sharply in the other direction. Meanwhile, Amelie had decided that it was really time for her to leave. Tapping her heels on the paving stones, she looked at her phone and thought about the fact that there weren't even any pictures of Mark Reagan on the internet. Is he trying to be mysterious or something? Does anyone even know what he looks like? The girl thought indignantly. Engrossed in her own thoughts, Amelie stopped noticing anything nearby for a while. Just at that moment, a luxurious car approached her and stopped. Amelie was surprised. The girl stared questioningly at the car, waiting to see who would get out of it. But surprisingly, the driver got out and opened the door hospitably in front of Amelie. "Reporter Manson," called out to the girl by a man who came up behind her. "Oh, how unexpected!" Amelie involuntarily flinched and looked around. Who could such a calm yet commanding velvety voice belong to? Amelie looked back and saw a handsome young man. Handsome, she thought. But who it was in front of her she could not understand. Mark Reagan himself. But at that moment, Amelie didn't know it, because she had never seen this man before, not even in a photo. In a business suit and a light coat thrown over his shoulders, he stood, and for a while just looked at Amelie in silence. She looked at him just as silently. "Do you need a ride?" the man finally asked. Amelie didn't know who he was yet, but she could tell from the car that he was a very rich man. She wondered why people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth act so frivolously. Mark Reagan stood looking at the girl, waiting for an answer. "No, thank you," Amelie finally replied. Immediately, the girl's hand slid down to her stomach area. The sharp, pulling pain made itself known again with increasing spasms. Mark noticed her tension. To ease the awkward moment, Amelie smiled and added that her boyfriend should pick her up. The man eloquently remained silent. It seemed that deep down he was very surprised by her refusal. There was no point in continuing the conversation any further. Mark nodded politely and walked to the car alone. Amelie was left standing alone, with her sad thoughts about the failed interview and the intrusive pain that was becoming unbearable. It was raining harder and harder. Amelie had to stand for a while longer before Alex finally arrived. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I took my first wrong turn here and couldn't find the exit." The guy apologized in the car. Amelie wasn't angry. She realized that with the weather like this, it was no wonder he was lost. On the way, Amelie decided to ask Alex who he had celebrated his birthday with. She wondered if he had fun. The guy seemed a little nervous. He literally didn't know what to answer and only mumbled something unintelligible. "With Michael?" Amelie asked herself. Oh, it was like Alex was just waiting for her clue. He nodded his head happily and naively marveled aloud at how well his girlfriend knew him, that she was able to guess everything herself. Amelie suddenly sensed an unfamiliar scent in the cabin. That smells nice. What on earth was that odor? "I didn't expect a heterosexual guy like Michael to use perfume," she remarked in surprise, and leaned over to Alex, sniffing. "Did he get a girlfriend?" Amelie inquired, but Alex suddenly pushed her away roughly. "Don't get in the way, I'm driving!" The guy got angry, but immediately he realized that he had overreacted and tried to rehabilitate himself in Amelie's eyes. "Don't be mad," he said guiltily and stroked her head. Amelie turned away and touched her hair. "Why are you stroking my head a lot lately?" she asked, puzzled. Late in the afternoon, the girl finally made it home. The rain was still pouring down unceasingly. How Amelie had waited a long time for this moment today. More than anything, she wanted to drink some painkillers, take a shower, and rest. Having coped with all this, the girl put on cozy pajamas and with a sigh of relief plumped on the bed. Thinking about the fact that Alex was probably already home, Amelie decided that she should call him before going to bed. With these thoughts, she rummaged in her purse for her phone, but surprisingly, there was no phone in her purse. Where is it? "I've been using it since I left Warner Manor. It couldn't have been stolen. I must have left it in Alex's car," Amelie reasoned with herself. Good thing she also had a tablet at home that had a program installed to track her devices. The girl turned that program on and hit the search button. Oh, this was something she certainly didn't expect. The search produced a very strange result, showing that Amelie's phone was now in the area of the First City Hospital. Amelie was both surprised and frightened at the same time. After all, she was sure that her phone had been left in Alex's car, but she couldn't understand why it was there now. The girl's heart raced with a surge of anxiety. Amelie's soul was out of place. The phona, no matter how hard she tried, couldn't stop worrying. It was already quite late. What if something happened to him? Sitting quietly at home, Amelie could no longer, so she again packed for the road. She got to the hospital so quickly that she did not realize how it happened. In her pajamas and raincoat with an umbrella in her hands, Amelie approached the hospital and almost immediately noticed Alex's car in the parking lot. Oh, so he's really here. But what was he doing at the hospital so late? There was no long wait, and soon Amelie saw Alex coming out of the hospital. Yay! She thought with a little relief. And just as the girl was about to call out to Alex, suddenly the words seemed to get stuck in her throat from what she saw. A girl walked up to Alex. What's that? And why is she hugging him so gently? and Alex looks like he's known her for a long time. Everything inside Amelie turned upside down. The girl opened her eyes wide to make sure that this was real and that she hadn't mistaken Alex for someone else. A clap of thunder rumbled from the heavens. A thunderstorm raged in Amelie's soul as well. The lovely stranger took Alex under her arm, and the two of them walked out of the hospital building. He carefully sheltered her from the rain with his umbrella on the way to the car. Amelie, as if under hypnosis, watched what was happening and could not fully believe in Alex's betrayal. The girl still hoped that she was wrong in her conclusions and that he would just push that stranger away. But that didn't happen. On the contrary, Alex and his companion seemed to cling tighter to each other. "Push her away and I'll listen to you!" Amelie mentally sent an angry phrase. Alex, on the other hand, had no intention of pushing anyone away. Even from a distance, it was noticeable how good he felt next to her, and instead of pushing her away, he hugged the cutie, covering her from the cold with the edge of his coat. Amelie stood under the umbrella, and though she was dry, she felt as if she had just been doused from head to toe with a thick, cold mud. Her heart was pounding like a madman, and some fragments suddenly began to surface in her mind. For some reason, she immediately remembered how calmly, one might even say indifferently, Alex had reacted to the fact that Amelie couldn't come to his birthday party. Even then, bad thoughts had crept into her mind, even though Camille had called her boyfriend overly understanding. Oh, there was one other thing that was so obvious. The smell of women's perfume that Amelie had smelled from Alex in the car. How stupid she felt right now. And then there was the way he was suddenly stroking her hair so often. After all, he had never done anything like that before. Only now did Amelie realize that in those moments she wasn't delusional at all. She should have just trusted her feelings. But instead, she found various excuses for Alex's actions. Amelie looked bitterly at the bracelet on her arm. Alex had once given her this jewelry. Memories suddenly came over the girl. Oh, how surprised and happy Amelie was when one day Alex, holding a bouquet of flowers, publicly knelt down in front of her and put on this beautiful bracelet. It took the guy 3 years to win Amelie's heart. And the day Alex knelt in front of her, he promised to make her happy. How loud and ridiculous now seemed his words that he and Amelie would spend the rest of their lives together. Oh, he had asked her to trust him then, and Amelie had believed him. And now, watching the tender kiss of these two lovebirds, it seemed to Amelie that her heart was breaking into 1,000,000 sharp shards. It was painful, staying in the shadows, being invisible to the two lovers who had become infatuated with each other. Amelie cautiously approached the car and put the very same bracelet on the door handle. It seemed to her that if she left that piece of jewelry to herself, it would just burn through her hand. She returned home well past midnight. She didn't feel like sleeping, and what kind of sleep could there be when the person she loved and trusted had betrayed her? Amelie opened the album with their photos together. Oh, how many things had happened during the time they'd been dating. In the photos from their trip, she and Alex were smiling and seemed so carefree and happy. The tears began to roll on their own. One by one, the drops fell on the photo. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It seemed that Amelie already knew who it was. The girl opened the door. Yes, it was Alex, just as she thought. She didn't want to see him. The boy silently lowered his gaze. He looked very guilty, but that silence of his made Amelie feel even more hurt. "Amelie!" Alex whispered softly. In his hand was the girl's bracelet. It was a new workday at the Financial Weekly publication. At the door of the editor-in-chief of the finance department, someone knocked. Samantha Cruz invited them in. The bank called Ming. The interview has been rescheduled for 10 o'clock next Thursday. Also, one topic will have to be changed, Samantha informed in one breath, without even looking at Amelie, who entered. "Amelie Manson, you should send them an updated interview guide as soon as possible," the editor-in-chief stated and raised her gaze to the girl. Amelie stood as still as a statue and was unlike herself. Of course, Samantha couldn't help but notice this. She gave the girl a surprised look and wondered what had happened to her. Just failed to see Mr. Reagan and already such a poor state of mind? She wondered, and asked Amelie not to say that she was still angry. But the girl replied that that's not why she's in such a state at all. I broke up with my boyfriend last night, Amelie confessed as she lowered her dejected gaze doomfully. Having said that, Amelie immediately remembered that very night. She has a rich family, and her uncle drives a Rolls-Royce with a personalized license plate, the only one in town. He's rich and powerful. With these words began Alex's explanation to Amelie. Next, the guy started making excuses that he couldn't help it. He stated that he too wanted to reach such heights in 20 years. However, Alex emphasized that no matter how much effort he put in, he didn't even have a chance of buying an apartment. Amelie looked at him dumbfounded, not believing her own ears. Was this really a real reason to trade away the man she loved? I really loved you a lot. I wanted to be with you forever, but now I think we'd better stay friends. He summarized his speech. His words only inflamed even more the wound that had already managed to form in Amelie's heart. However, the girl did not utter a word. She only abruptly turned away from Alex to take his things, which she had managed to collect in the meantime. One moment, and the basket with things flew straight into the dumbfounded guy. Yeah, he clearly hadn't expected that. Who the hell would even want to be friends with you? And angrily shouted Amelie, and in an angry voice told the guy to disappear immediately from her house and from her life. The girl told the whole sad story in a few minutes briefly to her editor-in-chief. Bottom line, he stole your most expensive brooch and ran away, right? Samantha asked. Amelie only nodded silently in response. What a weirdo! Samantha gave her verdict, recalling that she had said earlier that Alex was no match for Amelie. She emphasized that she considered Amelie her treasure. It took me so much effort to finally transfer you out of the editorial department and start doing interviews for Financial Weekly, Samantha pointed out, and emphasized that with data like Amelie's, you could easily get anyone. The girl only sighed. She wished she could think like Samantha, but there was no way she could do that yet. Amelie thought about the editor-in-chief's words for a while and asked her what kind of man Samantha thought she should get. For some reason, there wasn't a single worthy candidate in her mind right now. Memories of Alex and his kiss with a girl Amelie didn't know prevented her from thinking about anything else. Alex's words about his new girlfriend having a rich family were playing in Amelie's head as if on repeat. I think he'd said something about the rich uncle of the girl who drove a Rolls-Royce with a personalized license plate. That memory gave Amelie some ideas. That if you try to get, for example, the owner of the Rolls-Royce. Amelie voiced her thoughts out loud. Why not? Samantha smiled approvingly. She liked this girl's train of thought. She honestly thought she was a worthy candidate for any rich man. After all, Samantha knew that Amelie had education and looks and a good job and limitless prospects. That was why she believed that it would not be difficult for Amelie to find such a man. With those words, Samantha handed the girl a folder and recommended that she not let her personal life affect her work. Get your spirits in order and have a good workout. Today at the summit, Madam Editor-in-Chief added, and patted the girl on the shoulder encouragingly. Amelie heeded the recommendations and advice, and soon she was on her way to the financial center for the summit. Before heading to work, the girl decided to get some refreshments. Walking through the park, Amelie spotted a candy shop. She knew that the company Alex worked for was somewhere nearby. If this wasn't the only pastry shop in the park, there was no way she would have come here. Buying herself a coffee, Amelie headed for the exit. Oh, this had to happen. Already on the way out, she came face to face with Alex and his new girlfriend. Alex seemed dumbfounded by this unexpected encounter. He obviously didn't expect to meet her in this place. Amelie, however, was just as dumbfounded. Although she was afraid to meet him here and now, she still didn't expect it to happen. That's unfortunate, she thought. The three of them stared at each other in silence for a while. Amelie's anger was building up inside of her. She was angry that she and Alex had just broken up, and he was already walking around with his mistress. Emily heard Alex quietly urging his new girlfriend to come here next time, but she didn't want to agree. "No!" she said, and emphasized that she was used to this pastry shop, and if she missed a day, she would be out of her mind. This behavior seemed strange to Emily. For some reason, she thought that this girl already knew who she was. What is that on her dress? Emily noticed her brooch, and on the girl's arm was the same bracelet that Emily herself had never taken off during her relationship with Alex. It was very unpleasant to look at. Emily had no desire to be here and see this bastard. She walked past the newly sweet couple proudly, as if she didn't care at all. "No matter how you look at it, that dog is incorrigible," she quipped as she walked away. It seems that Emily's words hit Alex's lady by the heart. The girl literally flared with anger. Emily could feel how annoying this girl was, but she liked it herself. She slowly walked over to the trash can to throw away the coffee glass. Then Emily turned around and said with disdain that some people simply liked to use secondhand goods. No matter how dignified Emily held herself when meeting her ex and his new love, she was still very hurt inside. Among other things, the girl was gripped by anger. Walking out of the candy store, Emily, first thing she did was kick a street pole with all her might. "Don't be angry. Calm down. You shouldn't be mad at a couple of cheaters," the girl coaxed herself. But keeping herself in control was getting harder and harder. After all, just at that moment, this unfortunate couple also came out of the coffee shop. "Honey, look at her. It's okay if she's yelling at me, but how dare she even swear at you?" The squeaky-voiced Alex's date was indignant. "It's okay, babe. We'll just pick a different coffee shop next time," her boyfriend reassured her. "Oh, now I'm convinced by my own experience. So rude. I'm even afraid to imagine how you've survived all these years with her," Emily heard Emily say, though she tried with all her might to pretend not to hear or see them. "We should stay away from people like that. The farther away, the better," Alex exclaimed. Emily turned away to not hear them anymore and suddenly saw something that interested her a lot. A Rolls-Royce. I think she had seen similar license plates somewhere before. Exactly. Emily remembered that the same license plates were on the car, near which Alex kissed his new lover. She remembered Alex's words about her sweet Sophie's rich uncle who drove a Rolls-Royce. Well, there was that damn Rolls-Royce again, Emily wondered. So that's the girl he found. Sophie accompanied him to the hospital, went on dates, and was with him, even knowing about all his women from the outside. Well, in that case, no wonder Alex is so obsessed with that Rolls-Royce. Emily finally realized something for herself. She suddenly realized that some people won't think of you as a generous and free person if you don't make them pay the bills for everything they've done. I guess in that case, they just think you're an idiot. Well, according to Alex's logic, he wants to spare himself 20 years of diligence. He seems to want strong patrons. Emily suddenly remembered Samantha Cruz's advice. What if she became one herself? Emily wondered. Even if she couldn't make Alex pay her bills, she would want the pair of bastards to treat her with respect and call her auntie from now on. Encouraged by her own thoughts, Emily walked over to the Rolls-Royce. During this time, a little cunning plan had matured in her head. Her broken heart and her thirst for revenge drove her to carry it out. Emily decided that she was going to ruin the life of the whole family. Oh yes, she would want to make that rich uncle hate Alex and his relative and cut them out of his life at the very least. Who's the villain now? Emily thought to herself, and at the same moment the demonic expression on her face changed imperceptibly to a fatal beauty. The girl plucked up courage, and with a sweet smile decisively knocked on the window of the Rolls-Royce. But contrary to all plans and expectations in response, Emily heard only silence. Emily was not one to give up right away, so she knocked on the window again. Silence again. What the hell is this? Emily looked angrily at her reflection in the window and thought disappointedly that her plan was slowly but surely going down the drain. Already desperate, the girl knocked a third time and asked, "Is there anyone in the car?" Ah, This time, she seemed to be heard. The glass of the car window began to slowly descend. Oh my gods! Amelie saw a familiar profile. Yes, that man in glasses she had definitely seen recently. It was definitely him! Amelie recognized this young man, and the longer she looked at him, the more convinced she became of the failure of her plan. Mark lowered the window completely. There was an awkward silence. Well, at least Amelie was definitely awkward, which was hard to say about Mr. Reagan. What was Amelie to do now? After all, the night this man had offered her a ride, she had declined, saying her boyfriend would pick her up. Yes, that's the man she refused. What an ironic twist of fate. Amelie didn't know what to expect from this man now, but she realized that she shouldn't count on his favor after that incident. The girl began to frantically think how to act and what she should say to him in this situation. Not thinking long, Amelie apologized and said that her phone was dead and she couldn't call a cab. She smiled sweetly and asked the man if he could lend her the phone for a while to make a call. But again, something went wrong. And instead of an answer, there was silence again. But what was the problem? Amelie didn't understand what was wrong after all. This man had previously taken the initiative to strike up a conversation with her. At least a drop of interest he must have had in Amelie, in her opinion. Since the stranger still sat silent, the girl decided to take a different route. "If you have a desire to give me a ride, I won't refuse either," she said. But the man didn't even look in her direction. The silence pressured the girl and made her feel terribly awkward. Amelie swallowed her saliva nervously. "I don't fail women who have a man." The stranger's voice finally came through. All Amelie could do was open her mouth in surprise. There was nothing left for her to say. In this case, her own weapon had been used against her. And before Amelie could even react to this and answer anything, the Rolls-Royce with the handsome stranger moved sharply out of the way. Oh no, not again! The girl couldn't understand what was happening. Amelie only looked discouraged at the departing car. That's it. The plan to ruin the life of the whole family of Alex and his girlfriend had burst at the seams without starting. After this incident, Amelie could not recover for a long time. She kept thinking about the fact that the man, who just yesterday tried to approach her, turned out to be the uncle of her ex's mistress. And today, he had also turned her down out of vindictiveness. "I don't let down a woman who has a man." These words of the stranger were constantly spinning in Amelie's head. These memories made the girl feel uncomfortable. What a shame! Just don't think about it! This man is really vindictive. She tried to calm herself. To get the bad, intrusive thoughts out of her head, Amelie decided that she should just focus more on her work. If my personal life is not good, at least my career can go uphill, she thought, and was encouraged by these thoughts. Now Amelie was determined that this time the interview with Mark Reagan would be a success. She couldn't even imagine yet what an interesting discovery lay ahead of her. "Miss, please come over here to register as a guest." The receptionist in the main building of Minggu Bank beckoned Amelie. When Amelie walked up to the counter, the first thing she was given was a special form to fill out. While entering her information, in one box Amelie noticed a familiar first and last name, Celine Amour. But what was she doing here? Opposite her name was written, "Interview." Then it was definitely her. Amelie knew this person. Celine Amour also works in their company, and she was always at odds with Amelie. From the first day Amelie joined the company, many conflicts immediately started to arise between them. If you take the last 2 years, even during this time Celine competed with Amelie for sources of information. Amelie just didn't want to believe that this was happening again. But everything was pointing to the fact that it was exactly that. Be that as it may, Amelie had work to do. The girl entered the elevator, and it took her to the 23rd floor. Immediately at the exit of the elevator, she was greeted by the receptionist. "Reporter Manson?" the guy immediately asked. Amelie audibly rejoiced at this encounter and told the secretary that she had an appointment to interview the president today at 4:30. "You didn't cancel because of an emergency?" The secretary wondered and rubbed the back of her head, puzzled. Amelie was literally taken aback by these words. The guy told Amelie that her colleague had already done the interview in the morning, and luckily, Mr. Reagan had some free time. Ah, the thing Amelie had been dreading had happened. Celine Amour is indeed a lot of trouble. However, Amelie did not show her disappointment. "Sorry, didn't coordinate amongst ourselves." She smiled awkwardly. "Disturbed you for nothing." The secretary sighed. Amelie just wanted to reply that it was fine, but suddenly her attention was drawn to someone. For some reason, everyone suddenly tensed up. Many of the employees stood up respectfully from their seats. A man entered the office. "Oh my God, how could that even be possible?" Amelie's heart shuddered. It was him, a tall, stately man in an expensive suit and glasses, whom Amelie had seen several times before. As Amelie had already realized, he was the uncle of Sophie, her ex-boyfriend's lover. And just Amelie had time to rejoice when suddenly the secretary turned to that man and called him Principal Reagan. Oh no. Amelie was just shocked at how much fate was messing with her. The girl wanted to literally fall through the ground right here and now. Principal Reagan? How is that possible? So, what comes out now? At first, Amelie knew Mr. Reagan as a nameless rich man. Later, it was revealed that he was the uncle of a mistress who had failed to hit on Amelie. And now it's been revealed that the man is the financial giant, Mark Reagan. You sure know how to pick and choose, Amelie Manson. The secretary walked over to his boss and quietly reported something to him. Amelie somehow, though she couldn't hear it, realized that they were talking about her. At that moment, she was petrified with tension. They were obviously talking about her, for Mr. Reagan immediately looked in Amelie's direction. The girl had mixed feelings. However, she was good at hiding them, and so, despite all her inner turmoil, she was able to smile directly into Mark's eyes as if nothing had happened. The headmaster's gaze was indifferent and cold. It was as if he were looking through Amelie. Contrary to the girl's expectations, Mr. Reagan did not say a word, but simply walked past Amelie with his assistant. Amelie, on the other hand, realized that she could not afford to stand idly by. She simply could not take and silently leave, and then pretend that nothing had happened. After all, then the realization of her plan would definitely be forgotten forever. This could be her last chance. Amelie suddenly pictured Celine's snide smile colorfully. No, she didn't want to see that gloating look again and admit defeat to this upstart. And Sophie didn't want to please either. Amelie cannot allow all these scoundrels who hurt her and ruined her life to continue to live as if nothing had happened and feel victorious. And to make sure that doesn't happen, she needs to get that interview at all costs. "Director Reagan!" Amelie called out loudly and forcefully to the man. The girl stifled her inner fear with a wild desire to win herself the title of Auntie. "We've arranged an interview for 4:30 today," Amelie reminded the departing Mark. The man stopped, but didn't even turn his head toward Amelie. Amelie knew she had to get his attention any way she could. "I've been waiting so long for the interview, and the day has finally come," Amelie babbled. The secretary looked at the girl as if she were a madwoman. He was puzzled that she was acting as if she had forgotten about their conversation a few minutes ago. Amelie was indifferent to him. She turned on her maximum charm and asked the director if it was convenient for him to start right away. Waiting for a response from Mr. Reagan was driving Amelie crazy. The girl's hands began to tremble with excitement. Mark seemed to notice that trembling. Realizing that this was someone who needed a special approach, Amelie decided not to give up and approached the principal closely. "I'll only keep you a moment." The girl looked pleadingly into Reagan's eyes. "May I?" Amelie asked, without taking her eyes off the man. Mark cast a fleeting glance at the girl. I wonder what he was thinking right now. And is it so hard to answer? Amelie hoped to hear something back, but instead, all she saw was Reagan turning away from her to his assistant. Amelie lowered her head dejectedly. Yes, it looked like she wasn't going to get that unfortunate interview. This is a failure, she thought with disappointment. Without a word, Mr. Director walked towards the elevator. Just as the doors opened and he was about to enter, he suddenly stopped for a moment. "Come in," he addressed Amelie. "Good people! Good people still exist, rejoiced Amelie in her heart. At last, she could breathe a sigh of relief. During the time she had been trying to talk the director into an interview, her hair had almost turned gray. In the elevator, it was just the three of them, Reagan and his assistant, who was shocked by everything that was happening, and Amelie. The girl understood that if Reagan had agreed to the interview, she didn't have much time, especially since the elevator was going down to the lower floors very quickly. Amelie was about to ask the director if she could start when suddenly his phone rang. What a shame, thought Amelie. What a bad time. For some reason, Reagan didn't want to talk and dropped the call. With a calm expression on his face, Mark sent the phone back into his jacket pocket. But at the same second, another phone call came in. This time, it wasn't the principal on the phone. Oh, this time it was his assistant. Adam had just had time to pick up the receiver when a squeaky female voice on the other side of the phone squealed loudly, "Get your uncle on the phone!" Ah, she screamed so loudly that everyone in the elevator heard her words. Amelie realized who that nasty voice belonged to. It was her, Sophie, Alex's mistress. Only Mr. Mark Reagan looked as unperturbed as a rock. He turned his head slightly toward Adam and asked him to tell his niece something. "Since she won't listen, don't let her dare appear in front of me from now on," he said icily. An imperceptible smile slid across Amelie's face. It seems it wasn't as bad as she thought. From this situation, the girl concluded that although Reagan adored her niece, he was still a bossy and strict uncle, and his words carried a lot of weight in the house. Well, perhaps the strong arm of this uncle would do just fine to intimidate Sophie. "You just wait, you little kept woman," thought Amelie ominously to herself. The elevator finally brought them downstairs, straight into the parking lot. Reagan, still not deigning to even turn toward Amelie, stated that he had 2 hours to go, and she could interview in the car. "Okay." The girl, who hadn't even dared to count on that amount of time anymore, agreed cheerfully. The assistant opened the door and the director immediately sat down in the auto and took off his glasses. He furtively glanced at his new acquaintance, trying not to show with a single gesture or movement that she aroused his interest. But even without that, it was clear that there was interest, because otherwise he would not have invited her with him. Amelie acted as if she wanted to charm Reagan. Gracefully, like a doe, she got into the car. All her movements were so smooth that it seemed as if this girl could float in the air like a feather. Amelie's inner self-control kicked in. She wanted everything to be just perfect now, from her movements to her emotions and facial expressions. Mark lowered his gaze and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Yes, wearing glasses for so long was tiring, but he just couldn't go without them either. After a while, he put his glasses back on and thought about something of his own. Amelie, in the meantime, was thinking that her facial expression and movements must have looked very professional. Well, at least she was trying very hard. "Cold?" Reagan asked suddenly. Amelie tensed up. She didn't know how to react to him asking her such a thing. As expected, he was incredibly considerate and tactful. So, she decided to forge iron while it was hot. The girl chose the angle she thought was best in the side lighting with a 3/4 profile and a head tilt of 15 degrees, and replied that she wasn't cold. "Open the window!" the principal commanded dryly. Amelie stared questioningly at the man, completely unaware of why he did so. The window immediately opened, and a torrent of wind whipped into Amelie's face, whipping her hair across her face. The girl shuddered. The wind had just seemed icy cold, and now she was really cold. Amelie was perplexed by Reagan's behavior. After all, she had not told him she was hot. It seemed that Mark's behavior could only be explained by the fact that he wanted to get rid of the show-off that Amelie had made, which, in his opinion, was evident in her every move. But Amelie did not make a mess of it, but accepted it calmly and calmly. The girl decided that she should just calm down. "The fall breeze in this city is really refreshing," she remarked. To somehow deal with her disheveled hair, Amelie decided it would be best to just bundle it up. which she did. Good thing she always had a hairband in her purse for such occasions. A couple of deft hand movements, and Amelie had a beautiful hairdo. Wow, she's got golden hands. Deciding not to waste any more time, the girl took out a tape recorder and asked Director Reagan if she could start recording. The principal was silent and looked sleepy. But Amelie wasn't going to give up trying so easily. Since she was here to do the interview, then she would take it, no matter what it took. I will be recording the interview in its entirety. I'll be sure to check with you before publishing it, Amelie informed Mr. Reagan with a smile. As expected, there was also a reaction from the principal this time. 0. If he's so tired, why not just install a cot in the car? Thought Amelie. Well, the girl's time was limited, so she opened her tablet and offered to start. The first thing the girl said was that the topic of the interview centered on the yuan's role as a reference currency in Asian monetary cooperation and its position in the East Asian region. And for some reason, upon hearing the topic, Reagan was immediately moved to sleep. What really surprised him was that Amelie spoke in exactly the same words as Celine Amour, who had interviewed him before. Everything was identical, literally word for word. First, I would like to know what measures do you think a large commercial bank should take to promote the internationalization of the renminbi? Came the first question from Amelie. What is your opinion? The girl asked again, expecting an answer to finally follow from the director. Mark looked at Amelie and marveled that the script of the interview was the same entirely with the previous correspondent. He looked into the girl's eyes, trying to figure out what the catch was. Amelie's eyes looked the kind that couldn't lie. Mark thought it was unlikely that she was the one plagiarizing her colleague's questions. Those extraordinary eyes looked at him so penetratingly, and it seemed that Amelie was not going to blink at all. The girl herself could not understand what was wrong and why Reagan was looking at her so strangely. The man sighed and looked away. Amelie decided for herself that if Reagan really had no hidden plans for her, then today she would be forced to finally find out the meaning of that grimace. First of all, to better compete in the international marketplace, banks not only need to maintain high levels of capital, but also the scale of sophistication of cross-border operations. Reagan finally begins to answer. Second, technology and information systems need to be updated to improve service efficiency, reduce risk, and meet international standards. Banks must update technology and information systems to adapt to complex international financial transactions, the director continued. Amelie was mentally pleased that his answer was so elaborate. Third is to develop the international payment and clearing system, improving the convenience and efficiency of international transactions to attract more international customers. Reagan summarized his answer to the first question. Next, the interview was already running smoothly. Amelie asked the questions she had prepared in advance, and Mark Reagan answered them. All his answers were detailed, clear, and meaningful. When Amelie looked at her recorder, she found that the recording had been going on for 2 hours without a couple of minutes. She was surprised at how quickly the time had passed and thought that keeping up with Reagan's rhythm really required the utmost concentration. Reflecting on the interview thus far, Amelie involuntarily glared at Mr. Reagan. It was good that he had closed his eyes from fatigue, and now she could examine him more closely. The man was handsome, albeit with a strange character. That's how Amelie would have considered Reagan if he hadn't suddenly opened his eyes. Finished? He asked, and looked the girl straight in the eye. He turned around so suddenly that he caught Amelie off guard. The girl instantly flashed with embarrassment and decided she needed to quickly shift her gaze to something else. "I've seen enough!" came out of Amelie's mouth suddenly. "So, minus the gift of speech. You should have said that." The girl turned away in shame. Her cheeks were burning and she didn't know what to say. Mark Reagan looked puzzled at the girl, who tried to hide from his eyes behind her clipboard. Amelie was so embarrassed. The girl realized that she must have looked like a creepy weirdo. Luckily, the torture was over for Amelie, for the driver was just announcing that they had arrived. The principal got out of the car first, and Amelie was quietly rejoicing that her miserable life had been saved so timely by the driver. As they got out of the auto, Reagan remarked aloud that 2 hours had already passed. Oh, right. Amelie had completely lost track of time. It was only now that she noticed that they had arrived in a completely unfamiliar place. Where are we anyway? The girl thought as she looked out the window. You can go, the director said coldly, and Amelie was in no hurry to get out of the auto, being in silent shock at the fact that there was wildlife everywhere. Still gathering her wits, the girl got out and looked around in bewilderment. Shock froze on her face. She didn't understand how and where she could go in the middle of the field. Or were the words of the director a pure joke on her? After all, one could only leave this place on horseback. While Amelie was gathering her thoughts and realizing where they had come to, the headmaster was already walking somewhere far away on his own. The girl was frightened, thinking that he was really going to leave. Amelie couldn't leave it like that and stay here alone. So she called out to Principal Reagan, emphasizing that she wanted to ask him one last question. "Can we talk about something else?" she called out, catching up to the man. "Talk," Reagan said without turning around. "Actually, it's just an inconsequential piece of gossip. I've seen quite a bit of discussion about it on the internet. So—" Amelie began to babble and suddenly paused. Reagan stopped. Apparently Amelie had intrigued him. "Do you have a girlfriend?" She finally blurted out her question decisively. Mr. Reagan turned around. He seemed to have clearly not expected this particular question. He looked intently at Amelie, trying to catch some subtext or subterfuge in her question. But other than the penetrating gaze of this extraordinary girl, he could see nothing. Catching Reagan's gaze, Amelie smiled. I wondered if he would answer her such a personal question. Mark Reagan turned fully toward Amelie. Wow, because his back in silence was much more familiar. Oh, he got too close and looked at Amelie as if he was going to burn her through with his gaze. For a while, they just stared at each other in silence. Amelie was as if under some kind of hypnosis from Reagan's gaze. Just as the director was about to say something, someone called out to him. Amelie saw an older man behind Reagan. "Did you just get here?" he asked. What bad timing, Amelie thought. Had he come a little later, and she would have heard the answer she was so interested in. The man turned his attention to Reagan's companion. He looked at Amelie curiously and asked Mark who it was that had come with him. Amelie was aware of who the man was. Luke Russell was a legendary figure of the financial world, a leading man in the business industry, and also known as a walking encyclopedia and a face of undeniable importance. Amelie had only seen him on TV before. "Hello, Mr. Russell. I'm Amelie Manson, a reporter for the Financial Weekly." Amelie smiled sweetly and said hello. Financial Weekly. I recall reading a few of your articles. Well written. Informative. Mr. Luke replied, and remarked that he hadn't expected to see such a young girl as the author. "You are too kind." Amelie lowered her gaze modestly. "I, Mark Reagan. I didn't know you weren't coming alone. I didn't prepare anything in advance." Mr. Luke patted the principal on the shoulder and quietly added that it was too rare to have girls here. That tone struck Amelie as peculiar, and she hesitated, assuming that Mr. Russell thought she was Reagan's girlfriend. Looking around, Amelie noticed how beautiful the place was. The private ranch looked well-maintained, and the owner's hand was visible. "My goodness, it's beautiful! Uncle Luke has literally breathed life into this ranch!" she exclaimed delightedly and clapped her hands together. "And the horses are such beauties! I've never seen them before!" Amelie marveled aloud as she looked at the beautiful animals. "Ha ha! Those aren't even the best horses yet. Genuine race horses in the stables," boasted Mr. Russell with pride in his voice. Even better?" said Amelie, undeterred in her emotion. Mark Reagan only glanced at the girl and mentally handed her an Oscar. Mr. Luke asked to wait here for a moment and left Amelie and Reagan alone for a while. Mark stared at the girl and noticed that she was still expressing an emotion of delight. Amelie felt his gaze on her and raised her eyes to his. She looked somehow so pleading that Reagan just couldn't say anything to her. "I'm going to go get changed." He threw and asked quietly as he walked away so the girl wouldn't do anything stupid. "Okay, I'll be waiting here," Emily replied happily. She was happy already at the fact that he hadn't chased her away. Reagan walked off somewhere with a puzzled sigh, and just at that time, a smiling Mr. Luke already approached Emily, along with his horse. "It seems you two have known each other for a long time," the man remarked good-naturedly. "Not at all, not at all," Emily replied, embarrassed. Mr. Luke decided to change the subject and remarked that Amelie, from his observations, was far from indifferent to horses. He suggested that the girl try horseback riding lessons since she had come here. "Really?" "May I?" wondered Amelie sincerely, and even somehow a little childishly. She was very flattered to be treated so well by such a famous man. There was no pompousness in him, which is often characteristic of the rich, nor arrogance. The man suggested that Amelie try on his wife's old riding clothes. "Oh, that would be very nice," she thought, and agreed. Mr. Luke Russell invited Amelie to go into the dressing room. Amelie followed the man, and she wanted to jump up and down with happiness. She had never ridden before, and she was crazy to try. Amelie was humming something to herself and didn't even notice Mark, who was changing his clothes behind one of the doors. But Mark heard her purring and looked back at the sound. Now Amelie noticed him too. Ah, how embarrassing. The girl quickly dashed off in her own direction, only to be seen. There was no problem with the change of clothes, thankfully. The riding clothes that Mr. Luke had given her were just the right size for her. The only thing left was to sort out the belt, and Amelie was having trouble with that. It would take time, she thought. Suddenly there was the sound of approaching footsteps. Amelie strained her hearing. Who is it? Oh, it must be Mark Reagan, already changed. The girl was excited and determined to do something new, but there was still that belt to deal with. Well, perhaps Mark could help her with that? When footsteps could be heard very close by, Amelie called out to the principal. "How do you fasten this belt?" she asked, expecting him to be more knowledgeable on such matters. Amelie turned her head to Mark and asked in an innocent voice if he could help her. Reagan stopped. Amelie froze in anticipation. Then she heard footsteps coming in her direction. "He's coming!" Amelie was immediately glad that the fish had been hooked and began to make herself beautiful. Reagan came as close to the partition as possible and sarcastically stated that if Amelie couldn't buckle, she shouldn't be in the saddle. Oh, how rude! Clearly not what the girl had expected. I guess the fish is off the hook, Amelie thought with annoyance. Amelie had to handle the belt herself. After a bit of fiddling, she managed it. Soon she was already outside. From the conversation, she could already understand that Mark and Mr. Luke were not related. As it turned out, Mark Reagan's father and Mr. Luke Russell were friends. And the fact that someone like Mark Reagan could come and keep Mr. Luke Russell company was clearly a testament to the place Mr. Luke held in his heart. However, Amelie realized that it was not friendship that brought them together, but rather a deep respect for each other. That was why, in her opinion, Mr. Director would try to make the best impression possible. Watching Mark Reagan, Amelie did not immediately notice Mr. Luke coming up behind her. He led the horse over to the girl and assured her that this horse was the most obedient. "Let Mark Reagan teach you how to ride," the man kindly offered. Principal Reagan. Amelie waved at Mark with a guilty smile. It was obvious by the look on his face that he wasn't particularly thrilled with the idea, though it seemed to Amelie that there was no way he was going to reject her this time. "Please." The headmaster nodded, showing courtesy and politeness. But for some reason, Amelie found the look on his face scaring the hell out of him. She tried to mentally reassure herself that there was nothing he could do to her here. He wouldn't feed her to the horses after all. Comforted by these thoughts, the girl jumped on her horse. "Director, I'm relying on you," Amelie said with a look back. But what happened in the next second literally shocked her. Mark Reagan deftly jumped on his horse, but not his own, but Amelie's. He settled behind the girl and took the reins. The girl flinched and instantly blushed with embarrassment. Why did he do that? Training should definitely go like this? Emily's tension was felt by Mark as well, for she literally squirmed and tensed all over. "What's wrong?" he asked, leaning over to her. "Nothing. Just nervous, since it's my first time on horseback." Emily mumbled quietly. "That's it," Mark whispered, and moved even closer to the girl. That's too close." It made Emily feel uncomfortable. The headmaster was skillfully handling the horse, and he was obeying him. For now, they were just walking in stride. Emily relaxed a little and calmed down. A measured walk and such beautiful views all around. What could be more beautiful? Emily was enjoying the process. Yes, this was the kind of riding she liked. After a while, there was no trace of her earlier excitement. The only thing that made her tense was Reagan, whose breath she could feel on her hair. It even seemed to her that her first impression of Mark had been wrong. She had never imagined that Mark Reagan could be such a gentle man. However, the girl didn't realize yet that she was rejoicing prematurely. She didn't yet know that the horse's measured stride would end as soon as it stepped onto the racetrack. And Mark Reagan, by the way, had deliberately led her to this track. Not far away, Uncle Luke was walking his horse. Emily called out to him and he waved back. Then something unexpected happened to Emily. Mark suddenly jerked the reins toward him. "Oh my God, what is he doing?" The horse roared wildly, and Emily almost died of fright. The only thing she realized at that moment was that she had to hold on tight. A moment and the horse was off and galloping at a fast gallop under Mark Reagan's control. Emily bounced on the saddle and struggled to keep from falling. It seemed to her that she was about to fly out of the saddle and crash to death. She screamed, begged Mark to ride more quietly, begged him to drive the horse slower. But he didn't think of slowing down, especially since there was a barrier ahead that they had to jump over. Amelie's heart sank. Everything around them was happening as if in slow motion. A 4-level barrier could be overcome by a professional rider. Emily pressed herself against the horse and squeezed her eyes shut. How scared she was. Such a surge of adrenaline in her body had probably never happened in Emily's entire life. The first barrier was overcome, but it was immediately followed by a second one. Emily felt like she was about to pass out. She was afraid to even move or breathe. The second was followed by a third jump, and luckily the horse successfully overcame all the barriers. Eventually, their horse jumped the barriers so many times that Emily had already lost count. Tears came to her eyes, either from the headwind or from fear. She didn't know what she was feeling anymore. All her pleas and requests to drive slower were in vain. Mark had successfully ignored everything. And when Emily began to realize that panic was overtaking her, she couldn't help herself and grabbed Mark's sleeve of his jacket tightly. "Please, please, please slow down," she pleaded again, looking back and looking the man straight in the eyes. Well, since the girl was asking so much, Reagan couldn't refuse. "Whoa, stop!" he commanded loudly, and the horse came to an abrupt halt at the same second. From the surprise and such a sudden braking, Emily almost flew forward. The director managed to catch her in time to save her from the inevitable fall, which, by the way, would have been his own fault. But Emily was glad that this hellish ride was finally over. It seemed that Mark finally felt a sense of guilt and realized that he had overreacted a little. He looked sympathetically at the girl. Emily was lying on her horse and breathing heavily. Even if Mark's conscience had suddenly awakened, she decided that no matter what he said now, she would never forgive him. "Shall we continue our training?" the headmaster asked with a sneer. "I've had enough," the girl replied, looking at Reagan with frightened eyes. At sunset, Emily returned home. The principal's car drove her to the house itself, right under the driveway. The girl was so tired from this day full of all kinds of emotions and events that she did not notice how she fell asleep on the way. She woke up just when the car stopped. Wiping her eyes, Emily glanced over to where Reagan was sitting and didn't see him there. He must have left already. Emily was so sound asleep that she didn't even hear him get out of the car. The girl got out of the car herself and tiredly wandered home. Yes, today had been a hard day in every sense. Rubbing her tired neck, Emily suddenly discovered that she didn't have the second earring on her ear. What a shame! The girl's first thought was that she must have left it accidentally in the car. She ran to check, but the car had already driven far enough away. Okay, it's not worth getting upset over some earrings for 50 yuan. Emily tried to console herself with such thoughts, but there was a slight annoyance of it on her soul. A new day greeted Emily at the Financial Weekly. She was met at the workplace by Camille. She immediately pestered the girl with questions as to why she hadn't looked at the chats or responded to messages. "There's been a thing going on," Camille intriguingly stated. "My bad, Camille. Missed too many group notifications. Was also in a hurry to finish my report." Emily excused herself. But still, she couldn't help but ask her colleague what had happened. And Camille revealed that Celine Amour had also interviewed Mark Reagan yesterday. "Ah, that's how it is," was all Amelie replied, even though she already knew it. "What's more, I stopped by the editor-in-chief's office yesterday and looked at her interview questionnaire," Camille added in a whisper. The girl then informed Amelie that Celine had completely copied a questions. "Every single question! Everything matches! To the comma!" she emotionally emphasized. Ah, well, that explained a lot. Now Amelie could see why Mark Reagan had reacted so strangely to her questions yesterday. Yes, and he was looking at her suspiciously. As much as the girl was offended, she realized that Samantha wouldn't even waste her work time on situations like that, which weren't even regulated by the instructions. Emily was almost certain that they would publish whichever version turned out to be better, but the wave of indignation in her soul was growing at an inconceivable rate. After all, it was her interview, her article. Why should Emily worry that someone else's article would be published first? The girl declared in emotion that she would go and ask the editor-in-chief about everything. She jumped up sharply from her seat, and pain spilled all over her body. On her way to the editor-in-chief's office, Amelie decided to go to the restroom. Yesterday, while she was absorbed in working on the article, she hadn't even noticed that the bruises on her legs were hurting worse. Amelie had never expected that a horseback ride could turn into something like this. Oh, it was all Mark's fault. It was all his fault. But the main cherry on the cake was that her interview had been stolen. Sitting in one of the stalls, Amelie suddenly heard someone enter and slam the door loudly. Oh, a familiar voice. Amelie realized that Celine had walked in and that she was now on the phone with someone. "Can't you see that Samantha Cruz is just defending Amelie Manson?" she said indignantly. Amelie decided not to come out and finish listening to this conversation for now. "Ever since she was assigned to the finance department, I've lost so many opportunities!" Celine continued her outrage, turning to shouting. She was trying to prove to her interlocutor that Samantha always takes Amelie's side. Oh, that was a revelation to Amelie herself, and a rather pleasant one at that. Good thing she had gone into the restroom. And then there's that Mark Reagan! The questions were the same, but she gathered so much more information. Celine raged in anger. "My article makes hers look like Mark Reagan just brushed me off. What kind of charms did she even use to get him talking like that?" she wondered aloud. Amelie decided that now was as good a time as any to go out and finish this scum off for good. "No witchcraft," Amelie said coldly, looking through the mirror straight into Celine's eyes. She was so shocked by the appearance of her hated colleague that she dropped the phone from her hands. "Just competence. And he just likes me better," Amelie added ironically, not even looking at Celine anymore. Amelie still couldn't understand how Celine still had the courage to act like a victim. She couldn't understand how Celine even dared to steal her questions, steal even her interview. However, Amelie knew for sure that he who laughs last laughs well. Amelie came out of the ladies' room elated. You bet she was, because she had just learned that her article seemed to be favored. What news! Amelie was overjoyed that her lower back was no longer bothering her, and even her leg no longer hurt. Once again, she had hoped that she would get to the title of Auntie, even if it was through thorns. In the cab, Amelie had to talk to Camilla. She was anxious to know how Amelie had won the whole thing. How great! Even with the plagiarized questions, she couldn't beat you, Camille remarked admiringly, and wondered what the editor-in-chief had finally said about Selena Moore. What could she have done? You know Samantha. Keeping the situation quiet is in her nature, Amelie replied. She suddenly remembered Samantha's words that since they were all in the same department, they would have to put up with it. There was no way she could fire Celine. The story was canceled, and Amelie's piece would run on the centerfold at the end of the quarter. The editor-in-chief had asked Amelie to calm down on that. Camille clucked her tongue unhappily. She remarked aloud that they couldn't do anything against people like that anyway. It was just worth always remembering that meanness was a sign of a person of low moral principles. Finally, they reached the financial center. But just as Amelie was about to get out of the auto, she suddenly sat back down abruptly and shoved her girlfriend in the same place. "Hey, what are you doing? Is that hot asphalt in there or what?" Camille was indignant. "That's not the point," Amelie replied in a whisper, putting a finger to her lips to get Camille to keep her voice down. And the point was that she had spotted Alex. The last thing Amelie wanted was for him to notice her. "So that's your boyfriend, is it?" Camille was taken aback, completely ceasing to realize what was even going on here. The girl stared questioningly at Amelie, her gaze demanding an explanation. "You two broke up?" Camille asked, and Amelie remained silent in response. Her friend already knew, as it were, that silence was a sign of agreement. Camille then suggested that it was Alex who had dumped Amelie. Amelie didn't know what to say to that. "Would it be wrong to assume that he was also cheating on you?" Camille's insight was astounding, and drops of sweat appeared on Amelie's face. "Hey, how did you guess?" The girl rushed over to Camille, bracing her arms. "Because I remember that he used to drive a Honda, and now he drives a Mercedes, and I'm still a journalist. I should be able to gather facts and draw conclusions," Camille replied calmly. Not wanting to offend Amelie, Camille suggested aloud that Alex's new girlfriend must be rich. It was spot on. The fresh wounds on Amelie's broken heart made themselves felt again. It was hard for Camille to see her friend dejected. "It's no big deal. It's only a $30,000 Mercedes. It's not the most expensive car. Real rich people won't even look at it." She encouraged Amelie and emphasized that they too could afford one if they tried hard enough. "Looks like his rich mommy isn't so all-powerful," Amelie remarked. And she suddenly remembered something. During her time with the principal, Amelie had noticed that Mark Reagan switched between a Rolls-Royce and a Bentley, while his niece drove a mid-range car. From this, the girl concluded that the principal doesn't spoil his niece too much with money. Doesn't that mean that he is also a rather stingy man? Amelie thought about it and touched her ear, remembering her lost earring. After a busy day at work, Mark Reagan was coming home from work. Even when he was already in the car, he continued to work on his laptop. He finally took off his glasses and closed his eyes for a moment. But when Mark opened them again, he suddenly noticed something shining on the neighboring passenger seat. The man decided to look closer and found a small woman's earring. It was very strange for Reagan to find such a find in his car, so he looked at it for a long time, trying to understand where it came from. Just then, his aide got a phone call. "Director Reagan, this is Amelie Manson from Financial Weekly," he reported. "Says she dropped something in your car," the aide added. And that's when Mark Reagan's puzzle finally came together and everything fell into place. Reagan picked up the phone. "Director?" Came a familiar voice through the phone. "Yes?" replied Reagan. "I seem to have left an earring in your car. Did you happen to see it?" Amelie inquired, and clarified that it was a small earring with what? "I haven't," Reagan replied, as if nothing had happened, even though he himself was twirling that particular earring in his hand at the same time. "May I ask you to look at it again?" asked Amelie, emphasizing that the thing was very dear to her. "How much?" the headmaster inquired suddenly. After a short silence, Amelie answered that her grandmother gave this earring to her mother, and her mother gave it to her herself. From the words of the girl, Reagan learned that this thing is their family heirloom. However, it seems that he did not really believe what he heard. "These earrings are my dowry, which I will have to wear at the wedding," Amelie continued to babble. The girl skillfully portrayed a trembling voice and said that looking at these earrings immediately reminded her of her grandmother, whom she had not seen for ages. Reagan quietly listened to all this. He could sense the deception, and listening to Amelie was amusing to him. "Good, seen it." He grinned to himself and admitted. Amelie was ready to cheer, jumping up and down, thinking that Mark Reagan had once again fallen for her hook. She wanted to make an appointment, but Reagan suddenly spoke. He ironically informed Amelie that her dowry was plain plastic. Amelie didn't want to bother anyone too much about her earring, so she asked for the address and decided to pick it up herself. Soon she arrived at the designated address. "What a place," thought the girl, arriving at the Bohai Pearl Cove. Amelie looked at the houses around her with surprise and bewilderment and couldn't understand. Can people really afford to live here? Thought Amelie, still in complete shock that Adam's assistant's house was now in front of her. Be that as it may, from this day forward, Amelie would consider her aunt's plan officially set in motion. And she couldn't help but be glad about it. Now she would have to enter that house. The way to the villa was down stone steps. Amelie quickly made her way up to the entrance. She wanted to say hello, but realized that no one had greeted her. The living room was empty. Amelie was able to enter the house without difficulty, as there was an automatic door. The wood in the fireplace was crackling cozily in the house, but still there was no one here. The girl decided to go up to the second floor. For some reason, she began to think that the atmosphere here was a little gloomy. She looked around, puzzled. Amelie suddenly thought she heard some sounds. Exactly, as if someone was leafing through a newspaper. She thought that since there was no one in the house, the owner might be on the terrace. And she was not wrong in her guess. But God, who is it? The man sitting on the terrace with the newspaper didn't look like the assistant director. Not at all. In fact, it was the principal himself. Amelie stared dumbfounded at the man. She had expected anything, but she had certainly not expected to see him here. Reagan looked up and saw the girl. He had been waiting for her for a long time. Taking his glasses off, the man pointed his hand in the direction of the book and said that Amelie's earring was there. The girl was pleasantly surprised that he had indeed helped keep the earring safe and sound. She sighed and quickly rushed off in the direction Reagan had indicated. The principal slammed his book down unhappily. "Found it!" Amelie exclaimed happily, finding her earring on the dresser. At last, she had waited for that long-awaited connection to her favorite piece of jewelry. Then the girl remembered Reagan and wondered if she should try and talk to him again. As she left the room, she suddenly noticed the gramophone and record collection. She wondered what the owner of this house was listening to and discovered that they were Sun Leland's music albums. And this artist was Amelie's idol. Although Sun Leland was a very popular singer with a reputation as a star of the first magnitude, Mark Reagan didn't look like someone with such musical preferences. Okay, she wasn't. Amelie decided to talk to the principal. "Principal Reagan, do you like Sun Leland?" she asked. "What?" the man interjected with bewilderment. "What a coincidence! I adore her! I have all those albums too," Amelie excitedly admitted, and asked which songs of this artist the director liked the most. And only Amelie wanted to tell about what she liked herself, as suddenly her eyes were attracted by a woman's handbag left by someone on the sofa. And next to it was a woman's scarf. Taking a closer look, Amelie concluded that these things definitely belonged to a young girl. She suddenly felt very uneasy. After all, this could mean that the director had a girlfriend. Yes, he definitely has a girlfriend. And she's probably here right now. Amelie literally wanted to fall through the ground right there. Amelie couldn't understand how she could have been so wrong. But anyway, she really didn't want to be torn into little pieces right here. So the girl decided that she needed to make her feet out of here as soon as possible. "Well, anyway, I got the earring. Thanks for taking care of her. It'll be dark soon. I won't bother you. I'll be off. I wish you all the best. Goodbye," Amelie quickly mumbled and resolutely gathered herself to leave.